Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. It's good to see everybody. My name is Elissa Levy. I was NYSC camper 2005. It was an incredible experience, and I'll give more of my bio, but I am very much interested in an interactive experience. As a high school teacher, I always knew interaction was, of course, necessary for learning, and it was even more than I ever thought. I don't think I've ever spoken for more than 5 minutes in a row to my students without there being some sort of interaction. And so it would be very strange for me to just talk for an hour. So I have materials, but I really do want interruptions. Either just cut me off verbally or I'm looking in the chat. I taught all last year on Zoom teaching high school, which means that I can look at the chat and do slides all at the same time. It's a fun way to live a life. So I guess we can just get started. So the topic, when Ray and I were talking about, what I was going to speak to everyone on, one of the big things I've been working on is what equity looks like in a science classroom. And I will be very transparent about where I'm coming from. I teach in East Harlem, and in the New York City school district in general, we are very much focused on access to resources for all students and making sure that structural inequities are and barriers are removed as much as possible to help our students. I do not see a lot of the conversation that is anti-critical race theory or anti-talking about race in schools. And so I'm coming from a clear position on that. And it is a difficult topic. And we should definitely talk more about it and go into things, but that's where I'm coming from. So as I said, 2005, New Jersey delegate, graduated from Yale in 2009 with a degree in physics. And I knew back in fall 2008, my senior year, that at a minimum, I needed a break before applying for a PhD. And maybe I would never get that PhD, but my professors all said, come on, you can do this. You're doing great work in my lab. Don't, and in some even said things like, it's really hard for women in physics. Like, you can do this. You need to show that women can do this. I was like, I don't want to take that on. I didn't actually like doing research, and I was really torn. Love science so much. I love asking the questions. I love figuring out what's true. But the actual doing of the work was not fun for me. And for a while, I thought it meant that I was just lazy because I just didn't want to do the work. I just wanted the answers. Isn't that the definition of laziness? So I took a break. I went into finance and was an analyst for a while. I really dislike doing investment analysis. It's research. So now here I am in a field I enjoy less, doing the activity I already knew I didn't like. And then I found my way into project management. I was a project manager for 6 years, the majority of my time in finance, and I loved it. I loved running around every day, just figuring out who needs which barriers removed so that they can do the research and the construction and the making things happen. And so I realized that I don't have to call myself lazy anymore. There's an actual career where it is your job to remove barriers to enable other people to succeed. So I liked my job. It would be so easy to tell a narrative of, I walked away from finance in this burnt out, frustrated days and just couldn't take it anymore and needed to go save the world. And that is so flat of a narrative relative to reality. The reality was I liked my job, loved the people I worked with. It was challenging. It was interesting. It was fascinating. And something was missing. And it was the shoe that just didn't quite fit. And it fit when I tried it on in the store. And I was just walking with it over years, and I thought it fit, and the blisters finally just got too big, and soon I was seeing orthopedists, and I was like, the shoe is close to fitting, but it just doesn't. And I took a big risk, walked away from it, and began teaching public school. So in the public school space, I mostly teach physics and computer science at the High School for Climate Justice in East Harlem. I do a lot of things outside of my school building. So I, for a while, ran the equity lab at STEM Teachers NYC, which I still attend, and now we have a new facilitator. I lead improv workshops for Academy for Teachers. I'm facilitating a workshop right now at Math for America, which the focus is how do you get your students to tell you true and honest things about your classes that will make your classes better. And I'm an editor for the underrepresentation curriculum. Highly recommend for any folks who are teachers. And then I do a lot of writing and advocacy work for STEM. So I'm going to pause because I really do mean it about questions. Any questions or comments, either unmute yourself or stick in the chat, and then I'll keep going.
Underrepresentation curriculum, is that the thing that I think of Moses Rifkin out of Seattle? Is that the thing?
Exactly, yes. So yeah, I work with Moses Rifkin, among others, on this project.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm on the Slack. I'm on the Slack for that, but I haven't used it deeply yet.
Gotcha. I am also on the Slack. It's a great group, and there's a lot of new stuff coming out. Yeah, Paul, we will connect offline for sure.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Bob Taft. I'm in my car.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have some resources to point us to get that honest feedback from students. I teach a freshman computer science class at a college, and I would love to get better feedback there.
Sure. Actually, let me just skip to that because I didn't actually have slides about it, but I can find my CoGen notes. Where are they? Here we go. So the term is cogenerative dialogue that was really popularized by a professor at Columbia, Chris Emdin. And Chris Emdin, I'll write his name in the chat, wrote a book called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. And so he popularized the term, but I've gone back and done a lot of research on the cogen or cogenerative dialogue. Those terms are in chat. And they go back about 1991 is the first time I saw that term. And it was used in a business context. How can managers interview the people who work at their company? And how do you talk to them about what's actually happening? And that was later in the early 2000s adopted for teachers with students. So these are my notes. So what I did, and I bought them pizza, but I had a bunch of students who came, and this is just my raw notes. I wasn't even planning to share this, but we had some pizza, and I asked them, what do you like about this class? What do you dislike about this class? What have you learned so far? Like, tell me in words. Let's see what's actually happened. How does this class compare to your other classes? Will you remember what you're learning? How do you feel about the grading? Oh, this has been a difficult year. There's been a lot of markers getting thrown in my room in my high school. It's been hard for students coming back from the pandemic. I'm happy to talk more about that. And then we agree at the end of the meeting on specific things I'll change for the future. And so we agreed on 2 specific things, which I've been doing since that meeting. And then we'll meet again and agree on additional things like, hey, did the things we changed work? Should we keep doing them? Should we try other things? So really, like, some key questions are, what do you like and dislike about the class? What has another teacher been doing that you want me to start doing? And the key is to choose students who span the gamut, right? Students you think just can't stand your guts, and students who are doing well, and students who are struggling. Get them all in a room, feed them some pizza, and get them to be honest. And it can be tough, but the more you do it, the more comfortable it starts to feel. Mickey wrote in chat about students with autism. I have some experience teaching students with autism. I would say, what are the stats? About a third to a half of my students have IEPs, which are individualized education plans. So they have some sort of learning disability diagnosis. But it varies in terms of what their needs are. And I have found in general that every student has different needs, and you have to meet with them and talk with them. And they usually know themselves well enough to articulate their needs. And then you can talk with parents as well. But yeah, it's multiple modalities. So I let students submit work electronically or on paper or on a whiteboard and take a photo. And I prefer when students work in groups. I think physics in particular and coding, like you learn from the interaction. And when students don't want to work in groups, we talk about why, and sometimes there's a good reason and you can work alone. Like I'm very, very flexible about the how as you acquire physics knowledge. So to go a little bit into kind of conversations about race and equity, I never thought this would be my thing, to be totally honest. I knew that I wanted to teach. I was going to walk away from finance to become a teacher. I didn't want to sit in a graduate school classroom full-time for 2 years before they let me into a classroom. So I did New York City Teaching Fellows, which lets you right into a classroom. And the trade-off is you commit to teaching in an underserved school. And I said, great, it's fine with me. I just want to teach physics. And I ended up, the school where I teach in East Harlem wanted to start a 9th grade physics program. And their current physics and chemistry teacher was not a good personality fit for the younger kids. And so that was what they hired me for. And I became their first 9th grade physics teacher. And I loved it. It was, I could not have expected, although I had certainly read a lot beforehand, but the kids are so brilliant. And yet they don't know that 0.5 and a half are the same thing when they come to my class. They struggle with the vocabulary. You divide a circle into 4 pieces and you divide another circle into 3 pieces. They can't tell you which one is in quarters and which one is thirds. They told me, so we're measuring in centimeters. We had a whole conversation about, why centimeters versus inches. And finally someone said, what's a centimeter? Like none of them had really used centimeters in school. And so there's a lot of structural conversations to be had about, students from South Bronx and in East Harlem, mostly students who are Black and Latino. And like, they're brilliant though. They come up with such amazing ideas and questions. And I want the next generation of scientists. I need the next generation of scientists to include my students. And so how do we do that? And then at the same time, I was analyzing my curriculum, which was handed to me. It's the same thing I learned in high school physics. There's Newton's laws and Ohm's law, and you do some, you calculate some joules, and that's what you do. And I sat down one day and I wrote down all the names of the scientists. And they were all white European men. I was like, whoa, like I didn't think there was history in my physics class, but Newton and Joule and Volta, and Watts. So this was my first, like, not handed to me lesson where I started to engage with these questions. So this is the mainstream scientists activity. So this is what I did. I said to the students, all right, so your due now was, by this point in the school year, we've learned that falling objects get about 10 meters per second faster for each second they're falling. When do you think was the first time this measurement was made? Just make them take a guess, and what do you think about the person who made this measurement? How old do you think they were when they made their measurement? Do you think they were probably male or probably female? What country do you think they were from? And what do you think was their race? And what made you make these guesses? And then I had them just look at some biographies of all of the names that come up in physics and take some statistics. And they ended up doing histograms and concluding. So here's the synthesis of all the physicists whose work is featured in the mainstream curriculum. How many are white versus non-white, male versus female, and dead versus alive? Which is an interesting thing too. In chemistry and biology curricula, it's much more modern than physics curricula. Like why, and is it necessary that physics covers so much more of the old stuff before we get to the new stuff? So lots of reflections. What types of voices are not represented in the mainstream curriculum? How did it come to be that those voices are not represented? And what do we do to shape the field going forward? So this was my first stab at equity in science. And this was maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. Yeah, more like 3 years ago. Questions or thoughts?
Do you get into the idea, like, I know that with the, what do you call it, like the Snell's law idea, and a lot of these ideas, they've kind of been multiply discovered over history by lots of people, but the guy in the book is the dead white guy, so there are, it's not necessarily, you're right in that it's the how do we teach it question, not really the who really did it question.
Indeed. And it's so that's actually a great launching point, because this is where I started going from here. And so I was like, well, what else? What else is not the story that it's redirecting. There we go. This is a better link. What else is not the story that appears in the books? So I tried to question this idea that physics starts with Newton and that mechanics has to come first. And we're building off of Newton's laws and all of these, macroscopic objects moving kind of ideas. And so where is, here it is. I've been working on this project to figure out who actually did what, as a way of both telling kind of, Paul, what you were getting at, but also showing that mechanics need not be a prerequisite, because if all of these societies figured all these things out without having done all of mechanics, then, these things can happen in any order. And where is Snell's law on here? I'm getting some feedback. Is someone unmuted? Okay, that's good. So in optics and light, we've got a lot from the Middle East, around 1000 CE. So this includes what we call Snell's law, but laws of optics that were discovered in other places long before they were discovered in Europe. And a lot of what European physicists have done is taken from like Middle Eastern texts and translated. It wasn't until I was teaching physics in high school that I learned that algebra is an Arabic word and that the foundations of algebra are all Arabic, yet none of those names are part of algebra in the way that the white European names are part of physics. And I have a lot of Middle Eastern students who need to know that their stories are the ones being told in school. So yeah, I still have to really flesh this out more. I'm not a historian. I'm a full-time physics teacher who used to work in finance. And so I would love for somebody who's actually in the domain of history to really take this over and build it out even more. But the long story short is physics happened everywhere in the past 2000 years, all over the globe. There is a group coming out of the underrepresentation curriculum that I've been working with, and we are trying to write a decolonized physics curriculum. So the idea being that if you had a physics textbook that actually understood a holistic history of the world, what would that textbook include? And it's years away from complete, but that's the idea. So this is like the framework that things have been building towards, is thinking about in the classroom, what does a classroom look like? If in a classroom where all voices are being celebrated and promoted. So the way I thought about it is there's 4 components. There's what is the canon, what is science and math? Like this is the field. How is it defined?
Hello?
What are the structures of the field? So who has power? Who gets to decide which research approaches are taken and which ones are funded? So we've got the content, we've got the structure, and now we've got the biases and identities that people bring to the field and expectations of what other people are capable of or interested in. And then the last piece is the STEM teaching methods. Like, what does it look and feel like in a classroom? So for each of those, then what do you do? And so as a teacher, there are things to think about and read about and talk to others about. And then there are things that happen in the classroom. So I've become a person who believes you explicitly study STEM history in your classroom, even if it means like less time doing the necessary computations and graphing and modeling. Like you do need to spend time on the history to know why it is that these are the topics we're covering. And then talk about inequities today. So one group that's great for this piece is Step Up for Women in Physics. Step Up for Women in Physics. And they've got lessons that discuss modern day STEM inequity in a physics classroom, and some high school and some college instructors in that group. And then building student STEM identities. So how do you help everybody realize they can do it? Because it's hard. I mean, the imposter syndrome is real. I spent a lot of, the first 20 some odd years of my life thinking that the only reason I made it as far as I did was because I worked really hard and got lucky. And I will say I was so shocked and so excited when I got into NYSC back in 2005, and it was amazing. And I remember feeling the whole time like I'm in awe of all these incredible minds all around me. And I slowly started to realize over the years that I was incredible too. We're all incredible. We've all got great ideas. And what makes us great is that we keep asking questions and we keep working together and we keep being tireless in our pursuit of knowledge. And so how can I save my students from some of that imposter syndrome that I've gone through over the years? And then also like being responsive to where they are and who they are and using what we learn for good in the world. This is a tough one because there's a curriculum, right? The stuff I'm supposed to be teaching in physics class is not that different from what it was 100 years ago. And not a lot of it is directly relevant to my students' lives, right? Calculating the trajectory of a launched object at a 30-degree angle with or without air resistance is just not a meaningful thing to most people's everyday. And so yeah, it's a challenge, but these I think are the pieces. And then I also am very transparent with my students about my process. So I will show them frameworks like this one and I will ask them to react. Yes, exactly, Mickey, Angry Birds. And so you get a lot of video game design interacting with physics these days, where either students are coding their own simulations or they are calculating things and then playing Angry Birds to see if they got the calculation right. And so it's very much, yeah, game focused, because those are the connections. But I'd love to have something that also like makes the world better. And so that's where the climate piece comes in, which we can talk about in a different webinar. But when you get into climate, that's a place where physics concepts result in actually improving the world. But it means spending less time on motion and Newton's laws and spending more time on light and heat and those kinds of processes. So Mickey, because you asked in the chat about Desmos and GeoGebra, I will say, first of all, I'm in love with both. They are amazing. And I just made my very first GeoGebra simulation. And I'm very proud of myself. So now you all have to see it. That's just how this is going to work. I attended a workshop for teachers where they showed us GeoGebra. And I wanted to do the moon as it changes phases. And this is something that I am considering doing with my physics students. At a minimum, I'll send it to the math teachers. So all of these equations on the left, I drew a circle and I just created ellipses. And if you press start, you can watch as the moon goes through its phases. So it's a waxing crescent, half moon, waxing gibbous, full moon, and now it's starting to wane. So it's, you know, gibbous and then half again, and now a crescent. There's a start button, a stop button, and a new moon button. What more could you want? I also really do love Desmos. So I'll quickly show Desmos for those who are unfamiliar. And it's like a lot of students of mine, you know, don't know how to graph, and I don't want to necessarily spend 5 months plotting points because I want to tell stories with graphs. So every lab we do, you make your table. So, okay, we've got a car running across the ground and I've made marks in my ticker tape for the location, and at 0 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, etc. Maybe the car was located at the 11 centimeter mark, or actually we started it at 11, sure. Excuse me. And then it was at the 18 centimeter mark, and then it was at the 24 centimeter mark, and then it was at the 32 centimeter mark, and 40, 46, 52, let's say, for example. So Desmos automatically graphs it for you. You can fix your zoom so that you can see it better, and then you can create your line of best fit. So here's my y equals mx plus b. And I'm getting close. And you can adjust it until you have a line of best fit, and then talk about the physical significance of these values. So it's a really engaging way. And I find that it helps students who don't necessarily have the calculation strength to tell stories of what's happening physically. So I'm, big fan of both tools. Any other questions?
So I have a kind of a question, kind of a comment. When you were talking about the climate change thing, I think one of the approaches that I've tried to use and that I've heard about is that if you're using a model or Desmos or something to do a projectile problem, you are in some sense not only talking about the content of a projectile, but you're also talking about the process of modeling and predicting and all that kind of general stuff or process stuff. And so by putting that groundwork in there, you can later then say, the reason why we understand that climate change is happening is because the model that best fits the data suggests, whatever, you can sort of leverage that earlier work on simpler models that they have direct experience selecting what makes a good model to build as a foundation for the later work, kind of in terms of, in our college situation for physics 105 or astronomy 106 or something, these are people that are maybe never going to have another science class. And so we really have as an outcome, we want them to know things about how science works and how evidence works and stuff like that. So I guess I throw that out there as a comment for reaction, or does that seem in the right zone for what you're thinking about?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when I think about equity in science, most of the students who go through K-12 in the US or in the world, most of them do not become scientists in an explicit way. We don't want that, right? We need business people and we need people in government, but we do need every single one of them to be able to question what they see and the stories that they're told. Does it make sense? Does it fit with what I'd understand? Can I model this? Can I map a model against data? So you had this a lot, with the pandemic. There's so much data, and then you have to figure out what story to tell with the data. And there are graphs of data, and every time you graph something, you're making choices, and it could be misleading in a certain way, or it could be, like, how do you figure out the story? And then also there's models projecting COVID spread. So what's the difference between data and a model or a simulation? Like, that's not something that is obvious to students. And how do you even begin to ask those questions? So I'm with you, Paul. Like, that's something I need my students to take away, especially because, and this goes more into my computer science class than physics, but algorithms regularly screw over people of color. And those are my students. So I need them to be able to, for example, they get arrested because of a facial recognition algorithm. Do they know enough to say these algorithms are biased and I want to get a lawyer and I want to ask you have to know enough to be able to challenge whether if you think you're being mistreated. And so you get a lot of like, well, this is the way it is. I've asked students why, because they'll take the SAT, and their grades, their SAT scores tend to be low. And we talk about, I'm like, hey, there's a private school across the street, and their SAT scores are on average higher than yours with statistical significance. Why is that? Oh, well, we're just dumber. Like, well, you're not. I assure you, you are not. Let's talk about why. And knowing the social factors that result in these discrepancies and these inequities enable them to say, hey, wait a minute, I deserve more. And so it's ironic that telling them society screws them over actually can be empowering, but I found it to some extent in my experience as a woman in physics, where when I started to realize that women in physics feel disenfranchised, and that's a thing, it made me realize that those feelings I had were perhaps not indicative of incompetence, but rather structural. And so actually, maybe I can hack it. And okay, like, I gotta find my mentors and find my support groups and deal with structural things, but maybe I do actually belong here competency wise. So it's a nuanced conversation, and I went quite a distance from talking about models versus simulations, Paul, but that's to me the launching point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And ultimately the first scientific practice is asking questions, right? Interrogating stuff, and then it's all that other stuff about designing an experiment maybe, or collecting evidence, or interpreting evidence, arguing for evidence. But the first thing is asking a question. And I think it's nice to make that a big thing. It doesn't have to be a question about magnets. It can be a question about anything in the world. And these are skills that can be kind of applied broadly.
Yeah. Oh, and Mickey, I love that. The baking cookies. Absolutely an algorithm. And I also love with baking cookies how there's always things unaccounted for. You know, you could do your same cookie baking algorithm in New York City and the cookies come out a little different because we have different things in our tap water. And there's always going to be something to explain and to go deeper, which is hard in the sterile canonical physics curriculum where you're plugging numbers in, you get the same thing every time. I will ask for ideas, and I'm always looking for new things. I'm trying very hard to teach things I don't know the answer to. It is very hard to come up with things you don't know the answer to and can also teach at the level of students that you're teaching. But it's so important because if you only teach people how to do things that we've already figured out, then it's going to be hard for them to advance society into the things we haven't yet figured out.
I actually see that with my medical students. I teach at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. And it's really interesting. The students that come from professional families are really good at asking second level questions, but not really so much the third level or deeper questions. And they can't stand it if they don't know the answer. And they can't stand it if they're told they're wrong. And meanwhile, my students from the south side of Tucson or from the Indian reservations can't, they don't have the advanced AP classes that allow them to easily coast through biochemistry and some of the basic sciences, but you put them in the clinic and they can problem solve why a patient with renal issues is on 12 different medications and his blood pressure is still high, because they problem solve it down to a practical level. And they figure out that he's taking the medicines, the few he is taking them all wrong, able to get a patient's blood pressure normalized on 4 medications because they have done an amazing job of problem solving that the attendings, the residents, and the other students were unable to do. And it's really interesting and it's really frustrating. I mean, my son, who was an anthropology undergrad major, came to one of my clerkships. So the students that are just starting their clinical parts of the training, and they can't observe and they can't problem solve and they can't be curious and they can't blah, blah. So I got an art historian who's a brilliant medievalist, and she presented an illumination and asked the students to tell her how many people were in this one picture. And there was the king, and there were 3 very obvious people. They had heads, bodies, and feet. But behind 2 of those people, there was a forehead and a hat and 2 feet, but you couldn't see the body. And my class of 12 students kept insisting that the professor from art history was wrong when she insinuated that there was an extra person because there was a forehead, a hat, and feet. Except for my student from the south side of Tucson, who got it immediately. So I don't know where to go with it. It's the dean actually emailed me on a Saturday night and said, you've got to stop the art historian. The students are upset because they're getting the wrong answers and they feel like they're being publicly humiliated. Anyway, sorry, that was just a vent.
I'm with you. This is what it's about. It's like I take a very perverse pleasure in having that student who has always gotten 100 on everything, who's for the first time, wait, this doesn't make sense. Hey, Ms. Levy, I'm confused. And I say, I am so glad to hear that. What do you mean you're so glad to hear that? So this is, you know, you've got compatriotism here.
But that's interesting because your student will say, I'm confused. My students will say, this is irrelevant information. This is wasting my time. This is totally unnecessary. And that extra person isn't there. You guys are making it up. It's not that they're confused. It's the rest of the world is doing something terrible to them.
Interesting. And thinking about what is learning, like I have always lived my life with a default belief that any information is worth taking in because it will likely be valuable later. Even a subject I don't enjoy. Never really enjoyed studying history in school, avoided it at all costs in college. But if you had sat me down in a history class, I would have listened and tried, because for the time that I'm there, there's got to be a reason. And even if, you know, I'm a medical school student, like my professor's bringing in an art historian, like there's a connection to be made if only I am open to it. And sort of teaching that as a default approach is, I think, a valuable thing. One thing, Julia, that you said reminded me, are you all familiar with that video that they show in intro psychology classes with the passing of the basketball? There's a 50-50 chance I'll find it quickly from a Google search. Here it is, the selective attention test.
The invisible gorilla. I teach with that.
Nice. So I'm not going to play the video, but you guys can look up the selective attention test on YouTube. When I play it for my AP psychology students, I'm not teaching AP Psych this year, but in the past I have, they all see the gorilla. I finish the video and they look at me and they say, why did you play a video for us with passing a basketball and a gorilla walking through? And I'm like, what do you mean? You just count the basketball passes. So then we talk about, why do they see it? And it seems similar, Julia, to the student you're describing who noticed that extra person in that image. Because if you live your life in a place where you have to be paying attention to all different sorts of things, and you have to be open to multiple ways of interpreting, because otherwise you won't be able to survive in your community, and you're not conditioned to just get a specific answer and move on. Like then you see all the things that are out there that others are blind to because they've been told all along they're doing it right. And so they learn not to look in those other places. Oh, Brian, you sent me a message and I clicked on it. I'll look at it later unless you want me to play it for everybody.
Actually, it's a really good one. Nobody ever gets them all in this one. If they catch the gorilla, this one, nobody ever gets it.
Nobody ever gets this one?
They get maybe one or two, but actually, if you don't mind, if you want to watch it, it's pretty cool.
We are fine on time. I don't know. Should we play it? I'm getting votes for yes.
Okay. No, it's a great one because most kids have seen the gorilla or know about the gorilla, but they don't get this one.
All right, this one I've never heard of. So here we go.
In this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed
Oh
took
my
place.
goodness.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Well, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Wow. Wow. I got 0. No, I think I got one of them. I was like, that changed.
It's crazy.
That's pretty crazy. So I am definitely going to show that one to students. And also, I think doing more of, even more than I already do, of just talking about why, right? Like, why does this video belong in a physics class? And I do have a luxury that my friends at Bronx High School of Science and Stuyvesant, the fancy high schools of America, don't have, which is my students kind of trust that, like, this is what physics is because they've never heard of physics before. But in other classes, you know, I have friends who teach at very, you know, high caliber institutions, and the students say, you're wasting our time. You are wasting our time with these conversations. We need to be learning actual physics. So it's, yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and it's there's benefits to different communities that you're in terms of expectations. I have a principle where if you are not actively focused on equity in your science classroom, like, you are in trouble, which is different from other schools where if you know, dare to talk about race in a physics classroom, you're in trouble. So I know, like, classrooms across the country look very different these days, and it's about, you know, connecting across those classrooms and extending the conversation. So the last piece that I had specifically prepared for today is on frameworks for approaching science that really engenders question asking. So I'll just copy this link if you want to read more. There's a lot of frameworks out there, and I only made a new one because I didn't like the ones I knew about, but that's what happens after years of project management, making frameworks and PowerPoint slides every day. The idea of any lab, like in my ideal world, as I said before, a lab experience is one where I don't know the answer. And students have to make models, and different students could come up with inconsistent and equally valid answers, and they can define the parameters in which those answers are true and not true, or articulate what information they would need that would enable them to draw conclusions. And so this is kind of what we're building towards in my 9th grade physics class. I would not give them every single question to answer in our very first investigation, but by the end of a school year, I would want them to be able to answer every one of these questions. So first of all, what is your line of inquiry? What's the original thing that got you going here? And it could be an observation, it could be a question, it could be a goal, like stop climate change. And who asked it? Because it's usually going to be your teacher, and that's okay, but you should know who asked it. Is the person who asked it the Fortune 500 company who's funding your work? Or is it the Defense Department? Or is it a pure curiosity, right? Like, where did this question come from? Because that matters. And then the second part is the research path. Where did I get my evidence? And evidence can be somebody else did this work already, and I believe them. Like, that's completely valid. Reading somebody else's paper, a textbook, You know, if you can convince yourself that somebody else's work is valid, that's great. Or data. There's no way that I'm going to collect all the COVID data myself. I'm going to travel around the country and just ask everybody when they took their last COVID test and write down whether it was positive. No, like I trust the data in the databases, and maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And let's talk about why. Or did I make my own direct observation? And so for all of the different places where your evidence might come from, why is that a good place? So it could be, if you're doing a traditional kinematics problem, that you're using the kinematic equations of motion. And so the question is, are you trusting your teacher and your textbook? Ultimately, you know, Principia Mathematica. Are you deriving it yourself? Like, all of those things can be valid. No scientist rederives everything that came before them, but let's talk about it. The third section is the answer. So what is my overall answer to whatever question we're working on here? And was I surprised? You could argue that if it's surprising, you need to do even more work to make sure it's true. But again, discussion to be had. And if it's as expected, then oftentimes students say, well, that was boring. Why did I waste my time doing that? And so we can talk about what is the value of getting negative results or confirmatory results or things that don't feel so flashy. Then what are some limitations? What assumptions underlie my answer? And caveats or nuances for someone using this information. So relying on physics examples, you calculate the acceleration due to gravity of a falling object, and you get whatever you get. And you could say, well, you know, it might be different for whatever reasons, or it might be that it is only that number in this classroom. And I got 9.2 meters per second squared. And that's only true in this classroom because I didn't do it outside this classroom. So actually it's only true in this classroom on Tuesdays. So then what makes us think we can expand beyond that? And so this gets very philosophical very quickly, because you're talking about situated knowledge and you're talking about how we can come to expand our knowledge beyond something local. Really good point in the chat. Oh yeah, that was Robert, that you might need to examine your biases if it was as expected, right? Like if you do keep getting the same thing over and over, are you missing something? Is there another place to start measuring? Is your sample biased? So a lot of psychology research says people work this way. And you read the research and it's done only on white Americans. Well, then your conclusion, people work this way, is not a good conclusion. And maybe you need to do more research or draw a narrower conclusion. And then where to go next? How do we use this new knowledge to do good in the world? And what does this evidence make me want to investigate next? Because no thing ends when you're done. Like if you don't finish an activity wanting to do more, then like something wasn't right in the structure. Brian, I'm going to open the link that you put in the chat, because that's what I would be doing if I weren't sharing screen. So if I apply a source evaluation tool, nice.
There's a visual of it should be further down. Yeah.
Cool. Ooh,
So-
emotions and bias and intellectual courage. Nice. And then authority, purpose, point of view, publisher, sources, and year of publication. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, it was created by some librarians here and at Penn State. And I've been able to work a little bit with the one here who's done that. So I find it better than the crap test. And
I
really
had
like
not
the
heard of the crack test, but that sounds fun.
currency, relevance, authority. Oh shoot, I can't remember the last two, but basically the same idea. CRAAP, double check to see if it's crap. This is interesting. When you said, I'm sorry, I may be interrupting, but when you said that this idea of, actually, I just read because my teacher said it was, because I clicked on your link for the article. I did a research study where we created a quiz and a key that was wrong. And we gave a pre and post test to these subjects and asked them to do a study group with a group of people and gave them the key that they were going to do this study group on to see if they would trust the key or if they would trust their own knowledge. And in almost without exception, they changed what they already knew to be true because it was in the key, instead of being skeptical about it. And even when they were skeptical, instead of leaning to their own knowledge, they stuck with what was given to them. So I think really we struggle with this this idea of not just accepting everything that's there, but then there's also the flip side where you have, I think some of the problems we have is this critical approach to literacy is that people now question everything and let their confirmation bias get in the way. And so we have to find that balance between how do we get people to question things in a critical way versus questioning everything and just reverting back to, well, this person said it, I believe it, and their confirmation biases, which, makes it even worse. So.
Absolutely. I had a student a couple of days ago ask a question along those lines. She said, so we were starting our graphing and we were doing line of best fit and then extrapolating. So really simple case, like you've got a stack of disposable cups. I had them measure the height of 1 cup, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this stack, line of best fit. Okay. So, these cups come in packs of 200. Can you fit them in your cabinet? And you can just look on the graph. Where does it say it would be? And she said, but we haven't actually measured it for that many cups. How do we know? How do we know anything? And I said, well, here's your choice. You can either say, I don't know anything, I'm going to make a blind guess, or you can use the model you constructed and its prediction. Which one do you think is more likely to get you somewhere useful? She's like, well, my model and my prediction. I was like, right, it won't be perfect. In fact, there could be so many things you didn't think of. Maybe when you stack these plastic cups together, there's this weird property, and when you have too many of them, they melt together and get shorter, or they crack, or they explode. We can't know. We didn't graph that many. But you have to believe that the world is generally going to follow rules that are going to be roughly consistent in order to move forward in life. And so the question I asked her is, which way of operating is going to be more helpful for you? And then she came up with the example, if you're moving to a new apartment or a new house and you have the movers coming, you have to tell them in advance how many boxes you need, or else you have to pay an extra amount if you're wrong. So you could estimate, or you could say, I have no idea how many boxes I need. I'm going to refuse to answer that question and pay extra. Right? Well, you're better off making some sort of estimate. You're probably going to net out financially better if you use your model to estimate something. So yes, very much on the all models are wrong, some are useful thread. And this is subtle stuff. So I think a lot of teachers encounter these challenges when students haven't been engaging with these concepts prior to meeting us, or these concepts have been in their classrooms, but they've been refusing to engage for whatever reasons of values or where they're coming from. And then there's other pressures. I mean, administrators who don't come from a science background and it's a very binary, like either science is right or it is wrong. And being able to see the nuance in the field is, I think, really important. So that covers the content that I've prepared. I don't know, Ray, if you wanted to run a full 90 minutes or if, we should take some more questions.
Couldn't find my unmute button. I put an hour and 30 minutes in just to overestimate and stuff like that. I mean, we're welcome to go that long. People are welcome to continue to ask questions and stuff, but that's the reason I put that in there, was just to make sure we had more time than not enough time. So,
Perfect.
but I want to say for myself, this has been really enlightening. I've just really enjoyed this talk, and but anyway, but if anybody else has some questions and stuff,
yeah, we can totally, definitely keep talking.
Yeah, I found this really useful to trying to incorporate some of it as I teach these freshman computer science. But my question is a follow-up on my earlier one. You talked about the Cogen method of eliciting feedback. Did you use that in your program management as well as in your current classroom? It seems like, throw that out there for you to comment on, if you would.
I love that question. I would say I never thought about it until you asked this question. And now that you're asking, I definitely did it. So I came out of college thinking that it was all about what was right and what was true and what was measured. And that if you had good answers and you had good thinking, you'd be fine. And I walked into finance with that point of view, and it did not work for me. I was coached at one point early on in my career. My boss sat me down and said, Elissa, when you meet with somebody, you need to start the meeting by asking them how they're doing. And I said, why? That's really inefficient. Shouldn't we start with the first agenda topic? I said, I care about how they're feeling. I really do want to know, but I also don't want to waste their time. She said, it's not, you don't understand how this works. People are humans. We need to connect. We need to build trust and relationships and know each other. And then it makes it easier for us to realize we're coming from a place where our heart is good and we all have the same goal and we're going to work together. And I, over the course of my time in finance, really flipped from first thinking about the analysis and what is true to first thinking about the relationships and who we are as a community. And both have always mattered to me, but the thing that came first has flipped, which has served me well in the classroom. And so to me, a cogen is a formal tool for doing that thing you're always doing anyway, which is building relationships and coming together. And the value of a cogen is you're saying, I want to hear from you right now. Like, I am specifically going to ask you these prompts. You can tell I'm taking notes. Like, it's just further proof it's being taken seriously, and an opportunity for feedback that they have that they may have been giving, but I haven't really been hearing, to actually get heard. So I think back as a project manager, the places where that happened was really like lunchroom kind of, like we're all grabbing lunch together. And I say, hey, that meeting this morning? I felt tension in that room. Were people unhappy during that meeting? Like, what was going on there? And what would you have expected? And what can I do differently next time? And that's how the relationships build. And that's how you get the honest feedback. Because people don't always volunteer their feedback, but they're often excited to give it when they're asked.
I think it's really interesting that you said that when you came out, you thought very epistemologically in terms of there is a right and a wrong way for everything, and that the process is just, if you get the right answers, you know what you're doing. And it's funny because I studied, my educational psychology degree was focused on science teacher knowledge and learning from practice. And one of the professors I worked with talked about how in teaching, we tend to focus on the opposite of what we do in science. In science, it's all about experiences, patterns, and explanations. We first have the experiences with the real world. We find the patterns in those experiences and we try to explain those patterns. And then we go and we teach the explanations, and then we show some of the patterns, and then we do an experiment or have some experiences. It's exactly the opposite in education as it is in science. And then we wonder why we haven't prepared our students to be good scientists, because we've done it backwards. And we should be focusing on the experiences first. I love the 5E model: engage and explore before you explain. And that really fits with that. If you're having experiences with the phenomenon, even if you don't understand them at first, it provides so much more opportunity and changes the epistemology of science to one of the right answer to one of inquiry.
Absolutely. And for those who are not super familiar, the standards that most states are adopting now is the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards. They've been around, I think, 13 years. I have complaints about their website, because I think when you look at the site, it's not immediately obvious how inquiry and phenomena driven it is. But as Brian was describing, in an NGSS classroom, the first thing you see is a phenomenon. And then you take an entire few days of class to map out the components of the phenomenon and turn it into a set of structured questions. Those questions then each become a lesson in the next X weeks of class. And then the final thing at the end of that unit is you explain the phenomenon. So I love that idea of teaching, and it's the main reason I'm not 100% teaching that way is it's really hard to choose phenomenon that lend themselves well to that process. And the fact that it's hard, I think, is a testament to it's just hard to teach, right? You get 45 minutes a day and you have to have something to assess at the end. You're not just going on nature walks and doing whatever you feel like, but it's a great idea. Cool. Judy, I'm reading your comment in the chat.
Back in my office, where I have not been since July, I have a bunch of smart aleck expressions on my cubicle wall, and one of them is the line, "Who the hell picked me to have people skills today?"
I love it.
And I'm just constantly amazed at how often the human factors into what is considered a fairly dry numerical field.
So true. And it's a really delicate balance of confidence and humility to be able to ask questions of everything you see, to remain always the dumb shit and also the person who has the competence to actually do something. And I'm sure that will only become more nuanced as I grow through my career.
I will say also the flip side is for me not to take it personally when my boss questions me when I've been doing my job for 17 years. Although it wasn't this particular big elephant when I started writing it.
That's fair. Yeah, and it's I think there's also different types of being questioned. Like there's being questioned in ways where the person really wants to understand your thought process and you're delighted when they help you find holes in it. And then there's being questioned in ways that are just put downs or unstructured, like random questioning that doesn't actually uncover inconsistencies, but rather asserts authority. And so you want the boss who's going to question you in a way that's going to make the thing better. So I get the sense it's like mostly teachers here and then a few other folks. I'm just curious who the audience is.
One liberal arts major here who needed to figure out how to make a living.
My day job's doing math and computer science for the Navy at a R&D lab, but we have an active STEM outreach, and I've been teaching the odd class almost every semester forever.
I'm a physician, Indiana 81, and I only do 5% clinical now. All the rest of my time is teaching. And I just got a grant to do outreach medical education for rural underserved Arizona, and having to deal with climate change, heat-related illnesses, couching it as medical education, medical student education, but actually trying to get to the preceptors and the rest of the clinic staff at the same time.
Lee, it looks like you're speaking, but I don't hear you.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm a theoretical biologist at the University of Hawaii, and I teach discrete math and algorithms to undergraduates.
Awesome.
Are you at Manoa or are you on the Big Island?
At Manoa.
Oh, cool. I lived in Laie for a few years. Well, yeah, a number of years. Taught at BYU Hawaii.
Wow. All right.
I think Lee also visited the science camp in 1987 when I was there.
Oh my gosh.
So I have pictures of you where you look a bit younger. Yeah, I was a 1987 kid from Wyoming, and then I was on staff a bunch and was the director a few times about 20 years ago. And my wife was also a delegate. She walked in and out a few times. Many of you know Betsy as well. So we see you guys at reunions sometimes.
Great to see you again, Paul.
Yeah, good to see you.
It's been a while.
Right.
Speaking of that, I am the current director, and we're unfortunately having to be virtual next summer again. It's just too hard at Camp Pocahontas to get the safety protocols all in place with regard to either social distancing or making sure that we have enough staff locally who can who are willing to get vaccinated. So we're virtual, but we are changing seminars a little bit this year so that they are more like a conference presentation and less like juggling. Or playing on the green. So if anybody is interested in participating in camp this summer and doing a virtual seminar, any of you who are on here, or if you want to propose a lecture, we have a lot less options for that, but I'm welcoming inquiries. I put my email in the chat. So we'd love to have you. It's the 27th of June through the 20th of July. It'll be via Zoom, and it'll be interactive sessions like this one, not just where you would present and everybody listens and can type questions into the chat. So, but yeah, please reach out to me if you have some ideas. This is a unique experience. Well, has been the last couple of years, but a unique experience to be able to present at camp, even if you don't have the time to come to West Virginia. So.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it can't be in person because it's so magical. But on the flip side, you get a lot more people who can join on Zoom.
On the flip side, we actually have Adam, who was a virtual delegate. Maybe he can share what his experience was like.
That was pretty fun. It's pretty fun. Got to learn from a lot of people in a lot of different fields. So it was certainly very engaging. I don't know. It's just can't really think of a lot to say right now, but I really think that the experience was like it was really social too, right? It wasn't just like people like talking at you all day. It was like we actually got to like talk about the stuff we had learned. So it was really fun, and I got to meet people from like, you know, South America and stuff. So that was really cool.
Yeah, we didn't think we would be able to pull off a camp where some of the magic happened with those social interactions and engagement. And the last 2 years, it has actually happened. I think Adam shared nicely what his experience was like. So it's not like going to virtual camp is second rate. It's just different rate.
Yeah.
So.
Got together with some science campers last weekend, and actually Julie Wentworth was saying, oh, it's so sad what they missed with not having a real camp. And I praised it. And I said, you know what? Don't think about what they missed. Think of what they were able to have. After all, even with the limitations of COVID, I mean, in a time where we're all so isolated, that the fact that these young people were able to build and make connections, you know, Brian, I applaud you, but this is not a terrible thing that these young people were able to build strong bonds with each other. I mean, how many of the lectures do you remember versus how many of the people do you remember? I mean, I'm messaging Julie right now, remembering that she's Julie, even though her window says Julia, and remembering that her sister is Emily. And I mean, if that's not science camp in action, considering we were both 81 campers, yeah, that's fairly close, huh?
I think Betsy would probably deny it, but the color of the walls in here is suspiciously like the exterior of the cabins from about 1990 back. So anyway.
I think it's really smart that you're not trying to cram things into an in-person. My husband's integrated medicine here at the University of Arizona, and he had a conference where of the 100 fellows who were there, they got to choose in person or not. If they were in person, they had to be vaccinated, they had to have negative proof, they had to wear a mask anytime they were indoors. And of those 40 people, 5 of them became symptomatic despite all of that, with pretty significant COVID. So it makes total sense not to roll the dice at this time, I think, at least.
Yeah, it was a hard decision. My iPad died. I missed some of that because I had to switch to phone, but it was a tough decision, but I think it was the right one. Actually, we know it was the right one. It was hard to make, but there was no question once we looked at all of the pieces and said, you know, just it's not worth it. We don't want to put our delegates and our staff in that kind of situation. So.
Good for you.
Well, I guess we've come to an awkward pause. So really appreciate everyone coming, and greatly appreciate Elissa doing this for us, and extremely enjoyable. I especially like the structured skepticism. You know, I now have a term to use. So anyway, again, thank you so much. It was really, really enlightening, and really appreciate your agreeing to do it. So.
Absolutely. So much fun. It's great to meet/see everybody. I do love that Zoom enables us to connect. I've missed so many of the reunions just because I couldn't get myself to that city. And so I just am now feeling like I've like sort of made it to a reunion. So I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to see everyone. I know everyone here but one. Adam, you're the only one I hadn't met before. So anyway, really
Pleased
good
to meet you. Yeah.
Really good to see everybody, and y'all take care. Have a
Thanks
good
so much,
turkey
Ray.
day.
Thank you for having me. Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks,
Happy
guys.
Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Good to see y'all.
Bye.
Thanks, Elissa.
Take care.